My name is Monika Croyden, and I'm one of the librarians here at the Toronto Reference Library in the Languages and Literature Department. And I'd like to welcome you all to our Spring A-List. The A-List is our celebration of writers from across Canada. Before I begin my introduction of our guest, I would like to thank the Canada Council of the Arts for their support of the A-List series. Today we are very pleased to welcome Sandra Gulland as our A-List author. An American-Canadian, Sandra Gulland was born in Miami, Florida, and grew up in Berkeley, California. She went to university in Berkeley and Chicago, graduating with a BA in English literature and a minor in mathematics, which is interesting. She immigrated to Canada in 1970 and taught for a year in an Inuit village in northern Labrador before moving to Toronto to work as a book editor. She was a founding member of the Editors Association of Canada, which was at that time called the Freelance Editors Association of Canada. In 1978, Sandra and her family moved to rural Ontario, and she became a Canadian citizen in 1980. In 1985, Sandra began writing full-time. Her interest in Josephine Bonaparte and the Napoleonic era had been sparked in 1972 when she read a biography of Josephine. After decades of in-depth research, she began writing the fictional biography of Josephine in January 1990. And in 1995, The Many Lives and Secret Sorrows of Josephine B., the first of the novels in the Josephine B. trilogy, was published. This was followed by Tales of Passion, Tales of Woe, and The Last Great Dance on Earth. The trilogy is now published in 17 countries, or more, maybe. In 2000, right after the third book was published, she began researching and writing Mistress of the Sun, a novel set in the 17th century court of Louis XIV, the Sun King. And this book was published in 2008. And now we come to her eagerly anticipated new book, The Shadow Queen, published earlier this month by HarperCollins in Canada. As Sandra says on her website, The Shadow Queen is a sister novel to Mistress of the Sun, and together I think of them as forming the Sun Court duet. Both novels feature many of the same characters, although from entirely different perspectives. I'm struck by the time and effort spent in researching these historical novels, and it's very interesting to explore Sandra's website, where she details the sources and resources she uses. It's very gratifying to see her acknowledgement of the importance of libraries. She credits the Toronto Reference Library as, I quote, "the library responsible for my initial Josephine addiction and thus for my career as a historical novelist." So we take full credit. Thank you. Sandra and her husband now live half the year in a log house in Ontario and half the year in San Miguel de Allende in Mexico. Never resting on her laurels, she is currently writing the first of two young adult novels about Josephine's precocious daughter, Hortense. Please join me in welcoming Sandra Gulland.
Thank you for coming on this beautiful day. I've been in Toronto long enough to know that every day isn't beautiful. I thought I would begin with a question. How many writers does it take to change a light bulb? 2. 1 to screw the bulb in almost all the way in, and then another one to give it a surprising twist at the end. I know that's a dumb joke. I'll try to improve. I write what I think of as biographical historical fiction, and my subjects are historically known. So having a surprising twist at the end can be a challenge, but that's part of what I love about writing historical fiction, and fact-based historical fiction is figuring out how to craft a story from the facts. Each of my novels are sparked by curiosity. I write in order to learn and explore and experience. Decades ago, I became obsessively curious about a girl who was raised on the Caribbean island of Martinique, a girl who was told, I'm going to be following in the path of Monika's talk, a girl who was told by a voodoo fortune teller that she would be queen of the French, more than a queen. I just recognized an old friend. That this girl became Empress Josephine, wife of Napoleon, amazed me. Hers was a life story I found irresistible. While writing and researching the Josephine B trilogy for all of a decade, I learned of a book that was popular in Josephine's time. It was the biography of a woman named Louise de la Vallière, the Sun King's first mistress, a woman who leaves him and their children to become a Carmelite nun. She was described as timid, yet she was an Olympic-level horsewoman. And I know enough about horses myself to know that you can't be timid and be an excellent horsewoman. She was profoundly religious, yet she became the king's mistress. These contradictions provoked my curiosity and led me into 8 years of research and writing that resulted in Mistress of the Sun. And then, researching Mistress of the Sun, I discovered the story of a socially outcast woman of the theater who became the confidential maid to the most powerful woman in France. A maid who is only known to us today through rather scandalous prison records. Hers was another irresistibly interesting life story. This, then, is Claudette Desoyer, the heroine of my new novel, The Shadow Queen. I'm going to begin by reading from an early scene in The Shadow Queen. I think what I'll do, instead of talk and then do a reading, I'm going to talk, read, talk, read, talk, read. Short readings and talks in between. And all in all, it'll be under 30 minutes. And then there'll be time for questions and answers, hopefully, and signing of books, if you wish. The novel opens in the year 1651 in rural, war-torn France. The royal family has taken refuge in the town of Poitiers in the Loire Valley. Has anybody been to Poitiers? Whoa, great. Then you will recognize some of these places because they're set in Poitiers. In researching my novels, I go to each of the places where scenes take place, and that could be one reason I write about France. Claudette Desoyer is the daughter of a family of impoverished, roving actors called players, who are often without food and shelter. In this scene, Claudette and her father have just failed trying to get employment entertaining the royal family. Discouraged, they are heading back to the cave where they are camped when Claudette meets a girl who will become the obsession of her life. We emerged into the enormous guard room. The dogs were sleeping on a sunny patch of stone, the feast table ravaged. Father headed for the doors, but I lingered, snatching a few of the remaining beignets. At least we will not return empty-handed. Do you do enchantments? It was a girl's voice, directly behind me. I quickly concealed the beignet before turning around. Excusez-moi. I asked if you do charms. She spoke French with a refined, aristocratic inflection, somewhat archaic. I guessed her to be 10 or 11, a few years younger than I was. Her long, golden curls were lined up with extravagant silk ribbons. Spots of pink were painted on her cheeks, and her enormous sapphire blue eyes were lined with kohl. She looked like a heavenly creature. Certainly, I stammered, disconcerted by her noble bearing. An elderly woman, a governess by her dress, hovered about 10 paces back. And I do tricks of the tumbling kind, I said. I make faces. The girl blew out her cheeks and extended her neck, widening her eyes to make the face of a ghoul. That's magnificently ugly, I told her, and made a grimace in return. You have good teeth, the girl said, miming my frightening grin. I should note that Claudette is my first character to have good teeth. Josephine was famous for her bad teeth, something readers found remarkably upsetting. Louise de la Vallière, heroine of Mistress of the Sun, also had bad teeth, but I concealed this historical fact from my readers. I didn't think they could bear it. We don't actually know whether Claudette had good teeth or not, but it pleased me to give them to her. Now, to go back to the scene. You have good teeth, the girl said, miming my frightening grin. We were like animals courting. I live in a magical kingdom, she boasted. Well, I live in a magical cave. Oh, she breathed, with bats? I nodded, of course. Do you do magic there? She asked, switching to schoolgirl Latin. Ver, I responded. Then you must know how to cast spells. Why? I asked with a mysterious look. I want to kill my governess. I laughed. I do not jest, she said. This, then, is Claudette's introduction to Athénaïs, who will become the infamous Madame de Montespan, official mistress to Louis XIV, the glamorous Sun King. Claudette is enchanted by Athénaïs's beauty, her wealth, her life of privilege. Over time, Athénaïs will take advantage of Claudette's eagerness to be of service, getting her to partake in a horrifying magical ritual, luring her into the arms of her own lover, the king, and ultimately threatening not only Claudette's life, but the lives of those Claudette holds most dear. This will be what we today would call a toxic relationship. In Poitiers, Claudette's mother and father are attacked by religious bigots. In writing this novel, I did a great deal of research into 17th century French theater. On one of my early research trips to Paris, I became greatly frustrated because I could not find the location of the original Marais Theater. I blogged about my vexation, and got an email from a man I didn't know in Australia. He wrote simply, "Can I help?" He was Professor John Golder, a foremost expert in 17th century French theater. I emailed back, "Yes." Thus began what for me amounted to a master class on this subject. John Golder answered my countless questions and suggested a fantastic reading list that took much of a year to work through. It's an endlessly fascinating period in French history. A theatrical renaissance that included the playwrights Pierre Corneille, Molière, Racine. What I found most interesting was how players were treated socially. They were extremely popular. The word fan, as in people who are fans of a particular actor, originates from the French word fanatique, or fanatic. A fanatique was someone who would come to any performance a certain player was in, thus a fan. And this is possibly the origin of that kind of fervor. Although players were revered by the public, they were condemned by the Catholic Church. They were automatically excommunicated. They couldn't be buried by the church unless they had made a formal vow to forsake the stage forever and ever. They were regarded by religious extremists as devils. Now, fast forward 9 years to the year 1660. Peace has finally been restored to France, and everybody is swarming back into Paris, including Claudette. Although she's only 24, she is the one who has to look after her now widowed mother, as well as her special needs younger brother, Gaston. Gaston, I confess, is one of my favorite characters in this novel. He is unable to speak and communicates largely through an improvised sign language. Before Claudette and Gaston were born, their mother and father had played in the very first production of The Cid by Corneille at the Marais Theater in Paris, which was one of the reasons that Claudette had brought her family to Paris. After many futile attempts at finding some form of employment, Claudette lucks out. She finds a way for her mother to get theatrical work again. Her mother had been a talented player, but the death of Claudette's father had unhinged her. Claudette is hoping that a return to the theater will help cure her, as well as put food on the table. This is the opportunity Claudette has been praying for, but her mother typically is resistant. Mother pressed her hands to her throat, her eyes wide. "Claudette, I'm sorry, but I can't." I couldn't believe what she was saying. This was the most amazing opportunity. All our cares over, all our struggles, never to worry about the next meal. We'd be able to take Gaston to a healer who would know how to put him right. I might even be able to save money for a dowry. Marry. But Mama, it's the Marais, your theater, and the play is a new one by Corneille. And it's about the sorceress Medea, your favorite. The murderous Medea who kills her own children, as my mother was killing me. She burst into tears. You don't understand. You're right, I don't. I slumped down beside her on the rushes. I felt at a loss when my mother wept. I should be the one to weep. Monsieur Corneille asked for you himself. A prayer come true. Now it seemed it was all for naught. He remembered you, you and Father. He remembered your names. Mother made tight fists. There's something you don't know, she said. Her voice was reverent and tremulous. I vowed to forsake the theater on your father's grave. But Mother, Father wanted this, I said, pleading now. Never mind that he had no grave. He said acting was your God-given gift. The terrified look in my mother's eyes broke my heart. I put my arm around her thin shoulders, pressed my cheek against her frizzled red hair. Those were his very words, I said. Mother wiped her eyes with the hem of her apron. But it's been such a long time, Claudette. I will go with you, I said, and Gaston too. We'll all go together. Mother had frights in the morning, of course. I made her a calming lemon balm to take with her gruel. I'm putting your little virgin in my bag, I assured her. Then I reminded Gaston of proper etiquette. Stand tall, at least try to lock eyes, dip with a sweep of his hat. Monsieur Corneille is the greatest man in the land, I told him. Treat him as if he were king. Oh, Mary, Mother sighed, fanning herself with the chicken feather fan in spite of the bitter cold. The very mention of the great Corneille stirred up her humors, put her in a state of profound disarray. I'm told this isn't very pleasing posture to be. Outside, the sun was high and everything seemed unearthly. Mother began dragging as we approached the theater, turning in a trance of memory. I remember that shop. But oh, that's new. Look how that tree has grown. I took advantage of her reverie to glide her through the theater doors, which had been propped open with a paving stone. This isn't it, she said, coming to a stop in the entry, her hands on her hips. This isn't the Theater of the Marais. Now what? Mama, this is the Marais. It's completely different, except for she gazed down at a star design set into the stone floor. Except for this, she said, running the toe of her boot over the points of the star. This, I remember. Gaston, Claudette, look. Your father, he proposed to me, right here. My beloved Nicholas stood on this very spot. She blinked to keep back tears. It's all that is left of the old theater. We turned, startled by a man's voice. The great Corneille. He was plainly dressed, looking like a weary accountant whose sums didn't add up. I sank into a curtsy. And thus begins one of the enduring relationships of Claudette's life. I dedicated the Shadow Queen to the memory of my father, and I quote, in memory of my father, Robert Zentner, whose lovable eccentricities are reflected in several of the characters in this novel. And those characters are Claudette's witless mother and the dear and oh so great Pierre Corneille. I love them dearly. My last reading is a short one from the very end of the novel. You will see that Claudette's story ends happily, but you won't know why she's so happy or how it came about. So I'm not giving that much away. Claudette is in her late 40s. Her mother has died, very sad. Claudette has had a daughter by the king. Ah, another story altogether. She's just bought a house in the country, and her nearest and dearest have come for a few days to celebrate. I should mention that this house was I was very fortunate to tour. It's privately owned now, and for months I'd been trying to find out who the owner was, and then trying to figure out how to contact him, but without any luck. At last, in Paris, I again searched the net, trying to find a way to reach him. Voila. I found him on Facebook, sent him a message. He messaged me back, offering to drive my husband and me out to the chateau and give us a tour. It is a charming chateau, and it was yet another magical research moment. In the scene I'm going to read, a number of names will be new to you, but I think you will get the general idea. The village church bells woke me the next morning. Zounds, I'd overslept. I looked out the window at the bright summer sun. I heard Gabby's laughing voice, someone plucking at the harpsichord. I heard the goat bleating. I heard carriage wheels, horses' hoofs. I heard a man's voice, Monsieur Pierre. This, of course, is the great Pierre Corneille. I sat up. Was he leaving already? I threw on a morning gown and bonnet and slipped down the stairs. Monsieur Pierre, I called out, you're not leaving, are you? His haversack was in the entry. There you are, he said, turning. I've been up for hours. Oh, dear. Gaston and Pilon and the boys are all ready to go. Something about school. They're out back with your daughter having a last look at the pigs. Did you sleep at all? I asked, adjusting the tilt of his hat, which was famously askew. Like a baby. Have you eaten? He made a droll face. Your good Gabby is intent on having me fat as a Christmas turkey. He pointed his cane at a parcel. She's sending me off with enough for 36 men. Come, sit with me for a moment outside. There's something I've been wanting to say. He looked at me suspiciously. Am I about to be scolded? He asked, easing himself down next to me on a garden bench. How dear he was. It's just this, I said. I'd like you to move out here, live with us. He was a widower now. We could care for him, look after him. I'd been giving this thought. You could write here, I said. He made a rueful laugh. I've no words left in me. A line from one of his plays came to me unbidden. Each moment of life is a step toward death. Oh, wait. I'll repeat that line, Corneille's line. Each moment of life is a step toward death. Sweet contentment had found me in my graying years. "Are you sure?" I said, almost pleading. I thought of my father's bones, abandoned in a rocky field. I longed to gather my loved ones near. "I could arrange for everything," I said. "You wouldn't have to worry about a thing. You'd have your own rooms," his very own messes. I touched his hand, his writing hand, the hand with which so many lofty thoughts had been inked. His skin felt papery, barnacled. "You've been like a father to me," I said, my heart both aching and full. I know, Claudette," he said, his eyes glistening, "but you don't have to worry about me." Gaston appeared in the distance, Pilon, my daughter, and the leaping twins trailing behind him. I helped Monsieur Pierre to his feet. "Is it time?" he asked. "Yes, time," I said. Cradling a huge bouquet of flowers, Gaston raised one hand, fingers widespread. "What is your brother saying when he does that?" Monsieur Pierre asked. "He's saying he's happy." Grinning, I thrust both my hands up high, double. "And what did you just say?" "That I'm happier than I could ever have imagined." Thank you. Questions and answers?
We would love to invite you to ask some questions, Sandra. This is a good chance to ask her about her writing, her research. We have a microphone here.
Oh, yeah.
Testing. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great.
This is my favorite part of a reading.
Is it working? No. I would just like to know if you were successful from the get-go, unlike so many others who submit their manuscripts and only become famous after they've been rejected 100 times.
Okay. First of all, I will say I have 2 novels, practice novels, in the drawer that were fortunately never published. Josephine was accepted for publication by HarperCollins here in Canada. And it took some time for her to travel afar. In fact, she probably got rejected from every English publisher in the US and UK. And then a German scout read the manuscript, fell in love with it, and bought it for his German publisher. And then all of a sudden, everybody paid attention and click, 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 click. US, UK, French, Germany, Italy, da-da-da-da-da. So I would say yes. Napoleon said that he wins battles, but Josephine wins hearts. And she does. She's won the hearts of many readers everywhere. So I think that answered your question. Yes.
I have read on many occasions that the French court, that they had wigs because they had bugs and they didn't bathe all year, etc. Did you ever have to deal with, I mean, it's amazing, we see these things in all their glory in movies, but in fact they were all quite filthy.
That is partially true. These were the years after the devastation of the Black Plague. And hundreds of years before, a third of Europe died, if you can imagine that kind of grief. And the suspicion is that water, especially warm water, opened your pores and made you susceptible to plague. So it wasn't considered terribly healthy to bathe. So people might bathe a couple times a year. That said, they washed off.
Yeah.
The wigs, when the wigs were popular, which was the early 17th century, they shaved their heads to wear the wigs, and the wigs were full of little bugs and things. I mean, it was a time when you had bed bugs, you had fleas everywhere. These varmints were everywhere. We've got sprays and nasty little chemicals to control them, but the varmints were everywhere. The court of the Sun King, Louis XIV, wore his hair naturally. He didn't wear a wig until the end of his life. And so that was the new style for men to have natural long hair. And for women still, it was kind of, sometimes they wore wigs and sometimes they had their own hair. But yes, I think everything, and it wasn't certainly just the French. I mean, this was a period in history. Yeah. And, Louis could, okay, I'll leave it at that. Yes, thank you.
You mentioned that you had difficulty finding the Théâtre du Marais, and the gentleman who in Australia who helped you. Sorry, I'm actually going to Paris this summer. I'm bringing my daughter, and we're staying in the Marais. Is it still is there something? Is there a remnant of it?
Unfortunately, not. And one of Professor John Golder's campaigns is to try to persuade the French to at least put up a plaque about this really historically important place. Right now it's a park. It's the park in front of the Picasso Museum on Rue Vieille du Temple. So, it's a little park.
Yeah.
And that's where it was.
It took years for in London for them to, and they've now reconstructed a Globe Theatre, which now puts on these. And I just think, there's so much richness in the French theatre history that it would be wonderful to see.
It would be wonderful. Yeah. I would love it. There are theaters that in Germany, I believe, that are reconstructions of 17th century theater designs. They were built out of old, was the former tennis game. There was a earlier period of time when this form of tennis was very popular in Paris, and so there were all these covered courts all over the place, and then it became not so popular. And so they had all these abandoned buildings, and so a number of them were turned into theaters. Repurposed. Hi, Susan.
Sandra. I have a question about your creative process.
I can't hear you.
Oh, is that better?
That's much better.
I have a question about your creative process. You were talking about Gaston being one of your favorite characters. Do you imagine yourself as the character, or are you watching it as if you're writing a movie? Like, are they on stage in front of you, or are you actually inhabiting the characters?
That's a process.
Okay.
It may begin as a stage play where I'm watching them interact, but after 9 drafts, I am inhabiting them.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
I sink deeper and deeper into them. Personally, yes.
Great answer.
Yeah.
Well, sort of related to that, actually, is have you ever considered these stories that you do so much research and use your own imagination creating? Do you ever see them in a different form? Screenplay, theater play? Do you ever want to write the same stories in those forms?
Did everybody hear the question? If I did do that, I would do it as a tool in order to understand my own story better. I don't think I would ever do it professionally because there are professionals who do that much better. I would love to see any of my books interpreted in another way. We have a young woman who has become a very good friend, had done a one-woman show at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival based on the Josephine stories. And when I saw the video of her doing her one-act show, or one-woman show, I wept. It was so moving. Anyway.
I'm curious whether you plot out your books in a lot of detail, so do a detailed outline of the plot before you start writing, or at what point you do that?
Okay, this is a constant debate and discussion in writer circles. Are you a pantster or a plotter? Pantster is someone who just goes off and writes by the seat of their pants. And a plotter is someone who plots. Because I'm writing fact-based fiction, I have a structure to begin with that I have to work through. So I can't really be a pantster. But over the years, I've become more and more of a plotter. Insofar as I'm a very slow writer, and it's not that I'm not writing all the time. It's that it takes me many, many drafts, hence years, to get it, to discover the story. So in the interests of publishing a book sooner than 8 years, I've started learning how to plot. And I would venture to guess that every writer or beginning writer resists this, passionately. And I would say get over it. just learn how to do it. It's an imaginative first draft is what it is. It's not something, and it's not a formula because it's going to change. I actually did, and my drafts are 40, 50 pages long, single space. And I will, for the Shadow Queen, I did 3 drafts of the outline, and I should have done 4. I really should have, because at a certain point I said, okay, I just got to go. And then I got into certain troubles, and I said, if I had given more thought, for example, the bad guy, really, how, why hadn't I thought you have to have the bad guy come on earlier? You can't have him show up just at the end. Things like that. Anyway, and I also recommend reading books by screenwriters on plot because they are plot experts. And there are a number of fantastic ones, and I've read them all. And the one I am currently recommending is a very slender little thing, and that's part of the reason it's a good one to go by. It's called Blake Snyder's Save the Cat. And he boils plot down to its essential beats, and it's easy to see how to apply it. And then, of course, you become a pantster, because once you're in the story, I completely forget about the outline. But I'll come back to it. It helps a great deal. Thank you for that question.
You said about how your writing and research process takes a long time, like
Can
8
you
years. Sorry.
Yeah, just
Is
a
that
little,
better?
That's better. Thank you.
You said that your writing process and research process takes a long time, even 8 years or so. I'm just wondering about how you learn how to balance the fact and the fiction. I loved your Josephine trilogy, and as a history major, I did a lot of research with Josephine, and I found that you were spot on with her in many aspects, but then you still had that great story aspect. So I'm just wondering how you found that balance.
Thank you. What a good question. How to balance it, the fact and the fiction. As a historical writer, you really are free, as a novelist, you are free to do whatever you want. And your loyalty is to the reader. That's number one. It's to the story. That said, reading a book of historical, especially biographical, historical fiction, there's a contract of sorts between the author and the reader. The reader needs to have some sense of where I've strayed and what is accurate. So that's where the author note is very important in a work of historical fiction. So you can make clear, as a general rule, you have to prune the family tree. There are always more people, more children, more servants in every real scene. For example, Claudette had another brother, a second brother, not just Gaston. And he hung in until about the third or fourth draft, when I realized the story was going to be stronger if Claudette had just one brother. That relationship would be stronger. Everything about the story would be intensified. And so Francois had to go. The names have to be changed many times, because virtually every woman in French history was named Marie. So sometimes you have to create baby names or nicknames, things like that. One problem I had with the Shadow Queen was that her real name is Claude, but North American readers don't understand that that is a woman's name as well as a man's name. So that was confusing. And so I gave her the nickname Claudette. And I'm sure someone in her life did call her Claudette. But all we have are legal records. So anyway, did I answer that question? I could go on at length about fact and fiction, and what's real and what isn't. I try to keep to the facts as much as I can. Thank you.
Whoops. I would just like to, you've already applauded, I would just like to thank Sandra Gulland very much for her fascinating talk. Please join me in saying thank you.